In honor of PHCC's 40th anniversary, we begin our program with a special presentation, Presidential Reflections. PHCC has prospered under the leadership of 3 presidents during our 40-year history, and we are pleased to have all 3 leaders with us for today's program. The presidents will share their perspectives, provide insight on their goals, successes, and challenges, and their hopes for the college's future. Each will have the opportunity to answer several questions, including those submitted by faculty and staff. First of all, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Mr. Bill Stevens. Mr. Stevens is the former editor of the Pasco-Hernando and Citrus edition of the Tampa Bay Times, and he also served as a Times columnist. Mr. Stevens has covered area news and chronicled PHCC's growth since 1977. Dr. Milton Jones was PHCC's founding president, who served the college until his retirement in 1994. Dr. Robert Judson, one of PHCC's first employees, rose through the ranks to succeed Dr. Jones as PHCC's second president and retired in 2005. And I would also like you to welcome our current president, the college's third president, Dr. Kathy Johnson, who has served as our president since 2005. Immediately following the presidential reflections, I ask that you please remain seated so that I can provide you with a few brief announcements before we proceed with the morning breakout sessions. Mr. Stevens, please take over.
Thank you, Bert. I'm very happy to be here among you. In fact, I was just here recently for a political forum and for a concert by somebody that did Eagles music, which is wonderful. It's a great hall. These folks who are with me, they have an amazing story, and I want to get out of their way and let them tell it, because starting with the history of this college and going up toward the future of it and the present, it's really a remarkable story. This is when I come onto this campus and the one in Brooksville and Dade City, I always think in an area that is otherwise somewhat depressed, especially these days, these campuses are oases. And I'm just really grateful as a 30-year, 35-year resident of the area that we have these campuses and this kind of stimulation. And we take great advantage of it, my whole family does. So I'd like to begin, if we may, with Dr. Jones, who is the father of PHCC.
Whoa. Appropriate title.
Some might say grandfather,
whoa.
But...
Bill, you're off to a bad start.
I had the pleasure about 4 or 5 months ago of spending several hours with Dr. Jones on campus, and we just went through a recollection that began with him being appointed to this job 40 years ago. And it's a campus without walls at the time. There was nothing here to speak of. In this location, there was a lot of palmetto. But let's hear from Dr. Jones himself, who, let me just tell you that the head of the Board of Trustees at the time, Circuit Judge Wayne Cobb, was quoted in the story I did that said Dr. Jones's genes are all over this place, and that's certainly true.
And I've gotten a lot of, what shall we say, information about that title.
Well, tell us about how things were when you got started, because it's, I mean, it was a whirlwind thing.
Bill, 40 years is hard to remember, but.
You're getting old, Mill.
Bob, you didn't have to remind me of that, but I'm telling everybody I'm 79 going on 80. Did you know that? Oh, let's talk about maybe this campus. Alric Potberg, for whom the library is named, was a gentleman who owned about 5,000 acres out in this area. And immediately, he wanted the first campus to be built on this property. But the Board of Trustees and others had made arrangements for it to be built in Dade City. That became a wonderful conflict, didn't it, Bob? between the two sides of the county with 40 miles of palmettos and whatever else is out there between us at the time. Think about 40 years ago and what that road was like back then. Anyway, it was very interesting. This was a large rural district, widely separated population centers, and they were kind of small. Dade City, Zephyr Hills, Newport Richey, and of course, Brooksville. Where would we start the college? Everybody had an idea. And I think the one that I was not too happy with was that they would put the college campus, I guess they meant, at Gower's Corner. Can you imagine what we would be doing if we had one campus at Gower's Corners today? And in my mind, I thought, there's just no way we can do that. We're going to have to serve the three population centers immediately as soon as we started. So we came up with this, you just mentioned it, a district-wide campus, college without walls. Well, that stuck. Everybody kind of liked that idea. And we opened classrooms and offices in Dade City, Brooksville, and over here in Old Gulf High School. So that's the way the college began. And it took a good long while before we were able to generate enough money to be able to begin to build some buildings. I think the first year we were funded for 400 FTEs, but Bob, you'll remember those days. We taught 490, as I remember. The next year, they bounced us up to 600 FTE, I believe, and we taught like 800 or 900. Well, they gave us, so we were always underfunded for the number of students that we taught.
What's new?
Can you imagine that?
I can, yes, I can.
Some things never change.
And as far as I remember, Bill, we were funded for 900. The state thought they'd try to catch up. Well, we taught 1,200 that year. And I don't know how we did it other than we had 5 full-time faculty members that traveled around the district. Remember that, Bob? Mm-hmm. The math instructor would start in Dade City at 8 o'clock. Travel fast up to Brooksville for an 11 o'clock math class. Over here at 2 o'clock for the math class over here. Can you imagine that? We had 5 instructors and they all did that same travel every day. Though to work that schedule out, and Bob helped me with all of that, we had to work it out so that they would be crossing paths but would never be at the same place at the same time. So that's enough of the beginnings. Y'all go on.
Well, what he didn't mention is that he also taught a class. Is that right?
I
Imagine that.
required every administrator to teach a class. Are you listening?
No.
Bob stopped that when he became president.
Thank you, Bob.
You know, let me, I do want to, Bob was one of the first hires that Dr. Jones made.
Yeah, 4th hour.
And before he says hello to you, I just want to say that in the story that we wrote about him once, I think the lead was, if God had a voice, it would sound a lot like this. Treat us, Dr. Johnson.
Well, I spent 32 years here.
You did?
When I left, I was the last of the original employees to be at PHCC. And when Catherine sent me a note, she asked me to, said that I would have a few minutes to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened during the time that I was president. And I told her later that the most memorable times for me at the college was when we first started. And it was just being a part of creating something that I'd never been a part of before. And I thought about, I interviewed for this job, and this guy interviewed me. in his living room
In
in
Clearwater.
Clearwater.
We had all of the applications in the living room too, remember?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hundreds of them.
I drove here from Tallahassee for that interview, and then I had never been to Dade City before. That's where in fact, my wife thought it was in Dade County somewhere. So at any rate, we went by there. Interviewed with him in June, came to work July 1st. It was 3 counselors that also were responsible for recruiting students. We came to work July 1st, and we had to recruit students for classes that started in August. So we had about 45 days to recruit the first class. And when we got here, we were interesting is that there was one white guy on this campus, and one white girl in Brooksville, and one black guy in Dade City. And the St. Pete Times tabbed us the Mod Squad. Now, most of you out there never heard of the Mod Squad before, I know, because I can look at your little young faces and know you never heard of the Mod Squad. But the Mod Squad was an investigative team that was a black guy, a white girl, and a white guy. And it was a pretty popular TV show at that time. But we ran around, and in that 50 days or so, along with the help of everybody who worked at the college was recruiting students. But with that, we recruited about 600 students to go to this college. And the interesting thing was when you talk to people and you talked about coming to PHCC, the first question they would have is, where is it? And it was always very difficult to explain to them that we were going to have classes, but we didn't have anywhere to have the classes. So we persevered, and we talked with people all over the place. It was interesting, and I'll say this, and then I'll talk a little bit about when I was president, but I really liked talking about this more. The very first class PHCC had was held on St. Leo University's campus. In fact, my office was at St. Leo University campus at that time. It was a class, the first day of classes, 8 o'clock in the morning. Guess who was teaching the very only class that was being taught at 8 o'clock that morning? On August 21st, 1972. It was me. I walked into the classroom, and there were 2 people in there. Now, and they were not students. One was a reporter from the St. Pete Times, and the other guy was a photographer from the St. Pete Times. Now, understand that Wendell Duncan, who was the dean of students, knew and told these people, invited them to come to my class, but he didn't tell me. So as the class filled up, and it was about 35 students in that class, the guy started taking pictures, and the reporter was writing down stuff and so forth. And here I was teaching a class that I had never taught before. I was teaching an introduction to psychology class. I had never taught a college-level class before in my life. But at any rate, I had this photographer and guy there, and they wrote one of the nicest articles, and I'm sure, Bill, you've probably seen that article. It was written about the very first class at PHCC. Now, remember, it was August 21st because that was my birthday, too. Being president of PHCC came along after about 22 years at the college. And I never dreamed that I would become president of the institution, but I certainly knew at the time that I became president that I was ready to be president of the institution. There were some very interesting times, the beginning of which was my selection as president. Milt had decided, I guess in about September of the year, that he was going to retire and that we needed to start a presidential search process. Well, the board started it. And the board went through the process pretty quickly. Milt was going to retire June 30th of the following year, 1994.
2 years.
This was in 1993. Well, the board went through and they picked somebody by December of 1993. Milt wasn't retiring until June of 1994. I was that guy. The board wanted me to take over the operations of the college, and I did. But with Milt looking over my shoulder, it was the longest 6 months of my life.
You bet.
Very good. Very good. Anybody out there work for Dr. Jones at any time?
There's a few left.
Oh, there's a few left in here.
Our first student is in the
Shirley
auditorium.
Cherry's out here, our first student.
Shirley
Our first, yes, registered.
Cherry,
Shirley
please
registered.
stand.
Very first student. There she is.
She's now a math instructor, isn't she, on the East Campus?
She's going to be the fact checker. She's going to be like in the
Fact checker.
political
Well,
campaign.
she
She's
ought
going
to
make
know
sure we're-
because she was here as the first student.
You know, it could be intimidating, as you know. So I can see what the first time I went to a PHCC Board of Trustees meeting back in the mid-'70s.
Uh-oh.
Dr. Jones was presiding, and you had a board there, and I believe in an hour that I was there, the only voice I heard was Dr. Jones, and I'd been in the Army, and I kept thinking, man, this guy could have been my commanding officer. And very much in charge, very authoritative, and knew what he was talking about, I got to tell you. Also has this wonderful voice, don't you? You have to have a great voice to be president of PHCC, I'm considered.
That's right. You have
See,
to
he
sing
can
a
still
low
hit
C.
he can still hit the low C.
Bob does it better.
Yeah, it's
There's no room for me at all. I'm sorry. I'll try to get that low.
You can hit that high C
There, I can do that.
when you're angry. Particularly.
You know, as we sit here in this spot, I'd really like to hear Dr. Jones tell his story about the first time out here. He's out here with Rick Potberg, who owned all this property, trying to figure out where you might put this campus. And he shows up with a military map, one of these contour maps, you know, that only military guys can read. Good colonel that he is. And starts showing Potberg around his own property. So, and Potberg's got a cowboy hat on. They're in a truck or a four-wheel drive.
And his dog.
And his dog. So take it from there, Dr. Jones.
You've already told it.
No.
I met Mr. Well, this property was offered to the college. Huge interest in where the college would be located. It had to be located in Dade City because that's where the state said it was supposed to be. But we couldn't have one campus. It would be impossible. Some people thought Newport Richey people would drive all the way to Dade City. So when I came aboard, we came up with this district-wide campus, college without walls. So we opened 3 places the same day when we started, right, Bob? Mm-hmm. And you and others traveled around the district as circuit riders to be able to get it all done. Well, anyway, I met with Mr. Potberg. We started on the east side, but I met Mr. Potberg because I wanted to see the property that he had offered for free, where they were having to buy the property over in Dade City. I met him where I guess the elementary school is now, but this was almost a dirt road back in those days, as I remember.
Right.
And there was a gate down there. We went in that gate, and yes, I was a military guy, and I just happened to have a military map of this area, which was a lot of fun, because we went in the gate, and I showed him on the map where the gate was. Mr. Potberg says, "Oh." And so we start snaking around all over this property, and every time we'd turn a corner, there'd be a pond over here. I'd say, well, there was water in that according to this, but it was dry. So as we came in here, I kept directing where I thought we would want to put a campus if he were able to give us this property, and we could get approval to start a second campus. So we got all the way around. We went all through back here and then came out, and I said, well, the road must be out there about 200 yards. He says, how do you know that? And I says, well, first of all, I heard a car. And that's where the map says we should be. So we were looking at it. And this area, let's see, it would be on this side over here. That was a dry kind of gulch where water would come in and pond, and the pond out there was, so I said, Mr. Potberg, if you'd give us this corner right here, 100 acres right here, I'll dig out that and we'll build a nice lake there and we'll build one out there in the front and all that sort of stuff. And he says, oh, that sounds very good. And he says, what do you want? And I said, I want this whole corner up here. 100 acres was required at the time. And he finished by giving us 127 acres, I believe, on this site. That's enough.
It's hard to imagine when you see these beautiful buildings and all the things that are happening here and the dynamic nature of this campus, that it could possibly have looked like that just 40 years ago.
One other thing, let me add. I decided back when I was in graduate school, or I guess I was in a postdoctoral fellowship at the time, that if I ever started a campus somewhere, most campuses, you drive through the campus, you got parking all over the place, and I says, I will build a perimeter road around every campus, and everything will be contained inside, and the parking will be outside. And that's what we did here. Go ahead.
You know, Dr. Judson referred to the Mod Squad. It's kind of I remember the Mod Squad. Of course, you know, I've been married 40 years, so this 40th anniversary seems like, you know, just a blip. But this is also my anniversary to the same woman.
That's important.
But Dr. Judson referred to the Mod Squad, and I love that story. But you know, there's a history here with Dr. Judson is the first black president of a community college in Florida, probably any college in Florida. Is that correct?
No, first black president of a community college in the modern era. There at one time was black community colleges.
8 colleges?
12. There were 12 black
Around
colleges
state.
in the state of Florida.
Gibbs was in St. Petersburg.
Gibbs was one of those colleges, and Gibbs was probably the best known of all of those black colleges. However, the oldest one was in Pensacola. Was created in 1949. I think Gibbs was created in 1957. But the governor decided that that we were going to finally follow the rule of the United States Supreme Court. In 1955, the rule in Brown versus Board of Education that separate education was not allowed. But all of the black junior colleges, this is the interesting thing, all of the black junior colleges that were in Florida, only one was created before Brown versus the Board of Education. All the other 11 were created after Brown. So the state of Florida was really ignoring the ruling of the Supreme Court. Interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But I was the first African American after those were all phased into the white colleges, and almost all of them were in the same place where there was a white college. So they all were phased in. No president of any of those black colleges ever became president of a white college. And so I became the first one after that time.
So, and that's history, and that's a remarkable thing.
I chose well, didn't I?
Hey, you did pretty well. The guy who was the first provost of this campus became president of Gulf Coast Community College. Then he went to Dallas and became president of that college, and came back and retired as president of Santa Fe in Gainesville. The guy who was provost in Brooksville became president of Lake Sumter Community College, and then little old me became president of this college. So you did a pretty good job of picking.
No, my wife picked them.
Oh, your wife picked. That explains it, because I didn't think you were that smart.
Well, the deal was that all of the applications, 250, 300 or something, were lined up in my living room. And while I was off working, she would be going through the folders, and she would put the 4 best ones she thought in the front or out in front of the box. And you know what? Your name came up. You better give her.
I didn't know that. When I see her again, I'll thank her.
You know, this is not, and it wasn't particularly back then, a very diverse place. In fact, in many of the communities like Brooksville and Dade City, there was a distinct other side of the tracks. And so to have Dr. Judson coming into that position, it really opened up a lot of opportunities and a change that you could recognize on this campus with diversity, which to me was something that made the area much more hospitable and a better place for me to raise my children. You know, it's also been kind of a boys' club, as you might imagine. The state of Florida legislature, the government in general, the hierarchy, and yet the woman sitting over here right now, I remember when she was going through the interviews to replace Dr. Judson. How many years? 2005, is that right?
I was interviewed in 2004.
We sat in and covered the interviews, and there was a question that somebody, probably Dr. Bell, I believe, posted that said something about gender and, you would be the first female president of this community college, and how do you feel about that being a woman? And her answer was, well, I've always been a woman. Which I thought was pretty cool. And then as we called around up to North Carolina, where she was the president of a community college up there, what you heard from all the good old boys was she could handle herself just fine. Thank you. Tell us about that, Dr. Johnson. When you took over this place, and what were your first? You had a history in Florida already.
Absolutely.
I know you're at Jacksonville.
Correct. I mean, I'm a product of this system. I graduated from Florida Junior College in Jacksonville when it was military housing. Classes were set in the old military barracks, and so obviously being a product of the system, I knew clearly what this type of education can do for our students and the type of livelihood it could provide faculty and staff. So certainly as I began to continue my education and teach in high school, I always kind of leaned back toward those roots and began to see students have difficulty getting into colleges and deciding. So I decided I wanted to be an advisor and literally started working at Indian River Community College as an advisor for 16 and a half years, and like Bob, worked my way up through the ranks. In fact, I got to know Bob and Milt really because we were such a small sorority and fraternity of folks. We'd be at meetings statewide, and so literally I saw PHCC grow just as, not as an employee certainly, but as the last mandated institution. And so Bob and I stayed friends, and I happened to see him at a national meeting when I was in North Carolina. Excuse me, I'd been president at Indian River for 16 and a half years, and I applied for a couple of positions here in Florida, but I was not a sitting president. It was very clear the boards were choosing sitting presidents. So I just turned to my husband, I said, I think we're gonna have to leave the state if I ever want to be a president. He was very willing to go to North Carolina. I'm from North Carolina, so I can talk bad about that state. But we spent 5 years up there, and I was really enjoying myself. We were getting buildings out of the ground, et cetera, and I ran into Bob at a national meeting, and he said, Catherine, I'm getting ready to retire. And I said, oh, Bob, you're too young to retire. And he said, no, I really am. I'm ready. And I said, he said, you don't think about coming back. I had never considered this part of the state. I'd always thought of the East Coast. But we came over, did some silent shopping, went around the areas, went to the campuses, and I said, this feels good. This feels good. So I was fortunate enough when I applied to be a finalist from the community group, and then the board interviewed me. I went around to all the campuses, took on some unique questions of how do I like trees, and what would I do if the first thing what I do, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that they were negotiating for a traffic light out here, but I can tell you when I silent shopped, I said there must be tons of accidents out here because there was no traffic light at this exit. It was a blinking light. And of course, my husband and I sat there for 10 minutes. Classes had just gotten out, trying to get out. So the question was in my interview, what would be the first thing you'd do? Dr. Musanur asked me that, and I said, well, I'd get a traffic light out here. And everybody laughed, and I said, oh my gosh, I've just screwed up this interview. Yeah. But then they said, no, programmatically, what would you do here, obviously? But it was clear that it was a fit. the dynamics of the faculty and staff, the students, the only game in town, for lack of a better word, we were it. We were it. And I just thought the potential here was just phenomenal and continues to be. These gentlemen set the foundation that is really remarkable. Faculty and staff out here that have been here for the years that we're honoring today, remarkable. So it's a team effort, and I just couldn't be happier that the board was kind enough to give me the opportunity to be here. So,
You know, it's interesting how you have a progression here from left to right, or right to left, whichever side you're sitting on. But the pioneer started the campuses, started the place without walls, as we've talked about. Dr. Judson went on an expansion program. I mean, how many buildings do you suppose you got appropriations for during your time as president?
Good question.
Well, we had a first phase in this place, but I think you went beyond
Probably
that.
about 3 or 4 new buildings. But we renovated everything that had been built when Milt was
years
president.
earlier.
We were in a period of, all across the state, of low enrollment growth in the community colleges at that time. And so while we built some new buildings, I thought it would be better if we focused on getting renovation money. Everybody was trying to get the new building money for non-growing campuses. And so we decided to go after the renovation money. So we renovated the first facility over in Dade City. We renovated the buildings on that campus and in Brooksville and on this campus. In fact, where the president's office now used to be a chemistry lab. When we built the health building, which was one of the buildings that was built when I was president, when that building was built, all of that science material courses came out of that building into the new building. Speaking of that building, I've got one little story to tell about that health building. When they started to build the building, they were drilling pilings in the ground. And somebody came in my office one day and said, Dr. Judson, I need to let you know that they were drilling the pilings in the ground for the health building, and they hit the piling and it disappeared. I said, what do you mean it disappeared? She said, that sucker went down and we can't find it. And he said, now they're bringing in trucks of concrete. And for like, I believe 3 days, they pumped concrete into that hole in the bottom of the health building. So if there's ever a storm, tornado, anything like that, go to that building. It ain't going nowhere. I mean, thousands of yards of concrete were put in the ground under that building. It's so interesting. But I didn't know how to tell the board.
It seems to me that one of the biggest parts of y'all's job is going to Tallahassee, which you talked about Lecanto being an odd place for the campus, the singular campus of PHCC. I always thought Tallahassee was kind of an odd place to put a capital. But that's just me. But you guys burned up that highway, and you still do, Dr. Johnson. I know that it is a very tricky process of trying to get people to help us out here. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit, about the process and experiences and maybe some victories that help us get to where we are?
We can start backwards with the fact that we are going to be very victorious this year. Speaker designate Will Weatherford will be coming in as speaker. Pasco County has not had a speaker since the 1800s. So we're ready. We're standing in line ready. Certainly Senator Wilton Simpson, who just, by the way, I haven't announced in my first Monday report, but he has resigned off of our board. He was just elected, will be elected senator after the elections. Certainly Senator John Legg is an alum. Representative Fasano, it's going to be hard to say representative again after being senator. And certainly Representative Shank in Hernando County is an alum. It's a perfect alignment for the first time that I won't speak for these gentlemen, but to know that we have the leaders, they're focused on us, they want to do well for their constituents. So starting there, we have never been in that kind of perfect alignment. So we're ready to make sure they understand our needs, and certainly they have to be cognizant of every area of the state. But I think they clearly have been informed by these gentlemen years ago, and certainly me, that we are desperately in need of capital outlay as well as funding to keep operating and keeping our technology up to date. So it's an education, and it's staff now too, Bill. It's, with term limits, used to, you really kind of became good friends with the actual leader, the legislative elected leader. But when term limits came into play, it became clear that they had to act quickly. So they kept some of the same staff on from year to year to year. So what's happened is staff in Tallahassee has become very powerful. So if you alienate a staff member, you can pretty much find that your opportunities are limited. So you end up wooing staff members as much as you do the legislators. And I never thought I would be against term limits, but that has really changed my mindset, because it does end up, they don't want to do wrong, the new members of the House or Senate, so they really gravitate to staff who are knowledgeable. But unfortunately, that kind of skews their thinking process and doesn't allow them to say, well, what do I think is best? They just don't want to mess up, so they go to those staff members. So, but we can start there, and then you guys can talk about those early days, because that was just like pulling teeth.
Milt's the early day guy.
We had Senator Peterson, who was president of the Senate, and we had the gentleman that was the Speaker of the House from Newport Richey at one time.
Really? Because I
And
thought it was about
we were able to do a lot of things. I spent a lot of time in Tallahassee.
How about you, Dr.
That-
Judson?
It was always excruciating
Yeah, that's true.
to go to Tallahassee and deal with the legislature. But as you all know, it's a part of the job that you've got to go do that, and you've got to figure out ways to not only get your representatives on your side and allocating funds for your institution, but helping them to understand the importance of what that does to their whole group of people that they're representing, that they get the opportunity to have education and so forth. It's probably one of the worst drives to drive from here to Tallahassee that you could find. It's 4 hours of numbness. And then you get there and you've got to run around up and down the stairs and so forth, trying to find your legislators and talk to them.
I have a funny story to tell you about the travel to Tallahassee. Right after I was hired, I thought I'd fly instead of driving. And it just so happened, I call them flying culverts, but because I'm so tall, but it's those little that you have to go in, and you know, there's a seat on each side, and certainly not any flight attendant or a bathroom to speak of. Right. So you're in there, and it just so happened that Sarah Pappas was on that same flight with me. She was president at the time at Manatee. Gwen Stevenson was on that flight with me. She was president at Hillsborough. And myself, and then there was a legislative aide from St. Pete College. So pretty much the Tampa Bay region, all female, were represented on this flying culvert. And we encountered, just as we landed in Tampa, we encountered tremendous turbulence. And I have never been on a plane to this day where I felt like I was on a carnival ride. The actual plane flipped to the point where we were like hanging sideways and then flipped back. And no word from the pilot. It was behind a curtain. That's how small the plane was. No word from the pilot. We landed, and it was pouring rain, and we were all sitting there just figuring we had seen our last days. And the pilot came on the intercom and said, "Oh, I had a little jet wash as we landed." Well, for those of you who understand, I guess it's the turbulence from a plane taking off, and we were landing. Jet wash. He said, "Just sit right here. It's raining. We'll get you some umbrellas. We know you ladies don't want to get your hair wet." And Gwen Stevenson pipes up. She goes, "Can we go ahead and get off the plane?" She was crying. From then on, I drove. If they wanted to ride with me, and I have not flown since, but they rode with me because that was the most frightening. It was a quick flight, but it wasn't worth it. I like the 4 hours driving now.
Well, I was just the opposite. By the time I got ready to retire, I was flying to Tallahassee every time I went, practically.
But it took the same length of time. By the time you get to the airport, and then you fly up there and get from the airport to wherever you're going, it takes the same length of time as driving.
but you can sleep on the plane.
I slept some when I was driving.
I'll confess, I work a little bit in the car with my Bluetooth, so.
You know, in the first days, and I still remember this in Brooksville. As before I joined the Times 35 years ago, I worked for a paper called the Sun Journal in Brooksville. And little paper, and my boss, I was a sports
Tally.
writer, but my boss said it'd probably be a good experience for you to go over and sit in on some news meetings. You know, maybe go to the PHCC trustees. Take a run around the campus a little bit. I said, well, where is the campus? It says some furniture store down by the bakery.
That's right.
Yeah.
Turn right at the bakery and go back in there a ways. You'll find 4 or 5 cars parked in there. And I went back in there and met a guy named Bill Proctor. Bill Proctor and Bob Westrick. Bob was the president.
It was an old furniture store,
It was
wasn't
an old furniture store.
And we divided it into 5 classrooms.
Yes, sir. That was before, you know, and I hate to tell that story because it almost makes me sound old. But I tell it as a setup to what I'd like to hear from Dr. Johnson about this wonderful new campus over in Spring Hill that, you know, just a few years ago, I went out with her with hard hats on and took a tour of the construction, then went back when it was open, and, you know, I remember when Dr. Judson was trying to find the Spring Hill campus, and you talk about politics.
Almost
everybody
got me
wants
fired. I'll tell you that. I had some board members who were kind of upset with what was going on there, and took us a while to get it straightened out. For those of you who haven't heard the story, the Board of County Commissioners in Hernando County decided that our Spring Hill campus ought to be at the airport in Brooksville, and they were pushing from Tallahassee and everywhere else to get the college to buy land at that airport, which had a helicopter unit there and all kinds of stuff that just didn't make any sense to have a college campus where you're teaching classes where there are helicopters coming in and out all the time. 1, 2, it isn't in Spring Hill. But they were going to build a Spring Hill campus at the airport. And it took us about 6 months to get that get them out of trying to control where the Board of Trustees was going to put that campus. And finally, we did put it there bought the property on US 19, and Catherine has since built a campus there, and it is beautiful. And I don't know what enrollment you've got there, but it sure is a beautiful looking campus there.
It's the only one that's growing out of, I know where Bonnie is, she always brags. The other enrollment's a little dipping right now, but Spring Hills is up, so, I think they stole them from the North Campus though, so, you know. But what was fascinating about that, and Bob's giving me credit, but it was certainly his legacy that the Spring Hill campus with getting that property, but it was tilt wall construction, and I had never seen, I'm kind of fascinated by by construction, and you'd drive by in one day and there wouldn't be anything, and the next day you'd drive by and there'd be all these things propped up, and it was the fastest constructed campus I think I'd ever seen because they had that ability to pour the molds and then grind those molds up and actually recycle them as part of the parking lot. So we feel very strongly that campus is so environmentally friendly, but the opportunity to have in one's tenure 1 full-service campus open, much less 2, which we will have in 2014, is just a testament to this area, the growth, the dedication of the faculty, the staff, the students, because you're only funded when you qualify by enrollment. Now, granted, we're a little down right now, but we had tremendous growth, as most of these folks will attest to. Double-digit growth for years. Never got the funding we needed, and certainly, slowly but surely, they begin to catch up. So when we get that last $6.9 million this year, that will finish out the campus, the Porter campus at Wiregrass.
Good, great.
So when we go over to Wiregrass a year from now or 2 years from now, what's it going to look like? Is it going to look like Spring Hill?
No, it's the family who donated the land, the Porter family, really wanted an urban, corporate type environment. And so we're going to be next to Raymond James. We're adjacent to the Wiregrass Ranch High School. Shops of Wiregrass are right down the street. And I've joked, I say this, I've joked, please don't leave here today, I've joked that we need to move the district office over to the Wiregrass campus. Be good lunchtime strolling around shopping, but that's just a joke, we're not doing that. It will be built on a parking garage, and I shudder when I hear this piling disappeared as it was being built. I haven't heard of any pilings disappearing yet. We've augured around 1,800 pilings, 2.5-story parking garage, and we'll build a little over 100,000 square feet on top of that 2-story parking garage. So we'll be the highest. We had to seek a variance in Pasco County for permission to be that high. They had a 5-story minimum, and they've approved that variance. But what will allow us to do is have a corporate center there that will fit into the mindset of the Porter family for the whole development of that area. And the fascinating component of that is they're having to build it like they're building a high-rise in New York City with the tall cranes because the land is so fragile and environmentally sensitive around. They gave us around 60-some-odd acres, but only 47 were buildable. And we're required by Tallahassee to have so many parking spaces per potential students, faculty, and staff. So the only way we could mesh that and have the ability to park those students, faculty, and staff was to actually build that parking garage, because we would have never been allowed to build a parking garage, excuse me, on state funding. But it's the foundation of the building. So it's going to be a fascinating opportunity. We'll open in January of 2014. And hopefully have the same success that Spring Hill's had. Quite honestly, long after I'm gone, I think that campus will probably be one of the largest campuses we have, just due to the demographics.
The biggest campus at this
and I have
college.
to say, I have to give Bob Judson credit for that, because when I arrived, the first day on the job, he took me to Saddlebrook to meet Don Porter. That was my first appointment. And it took me 5 years later to get him to give us that land, but I was persistent. That was vision, because Connerton had been wooing Bob, and he said clearly that's too close to Newport Richey, and you and Gwen Stevenson had a gentleman-lady agreement. Right. She said, I want Citrus Park for Hillsborough to expand, and he said, fine, you give me the border of 75 and Hillsborough. She said, fine, and you really deserve the credit for that, because that area, as you all know, has just exploded, so congratulations on you.
You know, it must be one of the most difficult things about being president of Pasco-Hernando Community College is that it is several campuses in one. A lot of presidents have the advantage of walking out the door every day and being on the same campus, and they don't have satellites. That always seemed to me that you guys spent a lot of time on the road visiting administration, but also said to me you had to have really good provosts. You had to rely on people that are at those campuses every day to take care of business and hire good people.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I imagine that's a huge part. Tell me, what has the mission changed at all, Dr. Jones? I mean, when is it the same? Is PHCC basically the same mission today that it was when you took this place over?
Well, essentially the same. I'd say that we're probably about the same, wouldn't you, Bob?
Was when I was here.
It's just fresh, new, and interesting.
We've broadened, obviously, the legislative mandate that allowed several years ago for the Florida college system, which was in the Florida Community College system, to be able to offer baccalaureates, expanded the mission to a degree, but it's clearly delineated in that language that you must stay open door, open access, affordable, accountable, but also recognizing that there may be workforce initiatives that go beyond the scope of a community college degree, a AA or AS degree. So you are given permission, provided they're workforce focused, to seek permission to offer baccalaureate degrees. And this board, our board, clearly saw that. We had some community forums that business leaders were saying, Kathy, I can't find BSNs. I can't find bachelor's degrees in organizational or business areas. And in public service and in public safety, many of these folks get promoted with a bachelor's degree. So consequently, we started doing some research. The administration under Burt and several of the other provosts did some research needs analysis, and the board last month approved that we move forward with seeking approval from the Department of Education and certainly from the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, that's our accrediting agency, to be able to be given permission to offer those 2 bachelor's degrees. I think that will broaden our mission. I won't think, it doesn't change us, it just makes us more mindful of what we need to do to continue to meet the workforce needs of our community.
You know, since this is an anniversary, this is a celebration of 40 years, and we're really lucky to have you all here to talk about this. I'd be curious from each of you to, if you could tell me, what is it that you think during your time especially was the most important event? What is it that you're most proud of and sort of view as your legacy? We talked a little bit about that, but I'd be curious. Let's start with you, Dr. Jones.
Ooh. Well, I guess we were the last college in the system. It was probably because this was a large rural area, and where would you put the college at? The decision that we made that it wouldn't be a college, but it would be several campuses, probably was the biggest, I'd say, victory that we had and allowed to do it. So now this is the reason you'll have, what, 6 campuses before it's over, at least? Mm-hmm. That's more than Miami-Dade. And it's because we're such a large district, and because of the way everything grows around here.
Population pockets and so forth.
And the population centers. So I would say that probably is the key to it.
Dr. Jessen.
I don't know that there's one single thing that stands out, but several ones that come to mind. We tried to very quietly move the district office of the college from Dade City to Newport Richey.
Couldn't do it.
It just, I couldn't keep it under wraps. And there's still people in Dade City who turn around and go the other way when they see me coming. But having the district office here made all of the sense in the world to me, and I think my staff understood it too.
We thought that back in my day.
There were days when I'd get up and I'd come to Newport Richey to a meeting, go back to Dade City, and by lunchtime I'd be back over here again for another meeting. There was very little activity having to do with the administration and having to do with the foundation and so forth of the college, the foundation that raises the money for the college, that was in the Dade City area. Most of it was in this part of the county. And so it was that led me, and not only me, but many of the other of my staff who were upper level staff members drove back and forth over here all the time because of the amount of activity that was going on over here. And so in the middle of the night, one night, we moved our stuff.
It's like the Baltimore Colts in the middle of the night with the band.
From Dade City to Newport Richey, and as I said, my life, and I think most of the upper level staff life at the college was a lot easier because we did that. So that was one of the things that I think was extremely important. Spring Hill, of course, took up a lot of my time, and there was one other thing that happened. When Jeb Bush became governor of Florida, he changed probably 80% of all the community college trustees in the state of Florida. Even if they were Republicans and on your board, he replaced them. Because I guess that was his way of paying off some people who had supported him and helped him to become governor. In our process, he had changed 8 of the 9 members of our board. And I went to Tallahassee just to see the governor to say, I need to have at least one member on the board of trustees who knows something about being a trustee.
Give me chair.
And he understood. And he reappointed one trustee on our board. So we had meetings every Saturday. The trustees and I and my staff met with the new trustees, and we'd meet from about 10 to 12, and then we'd have lunch and then let them go home. But we did that for about 5 or 6 weeks in a row. And that's the way we got our trustees up to staff. That's a part of the reason that I think what happened in Brooksville about that Spring Hill campus is because all of our board members were new members, and they thought they could take advantage of the college and make us do what they wanted us to do.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
One of the, as you hear them talk, one of the things that PHCC does, and there are very few of these institutions in Pasco County and Hernando County, is it's a bridge. There, I mean, particularly in Pasco. Hernando's a little easier to maintain because it's not so wide, but Pasco is actually 3 counties in one, as you all know, and the road network east to west isn't the best in the world.
Right.
So it's that provincialism still exists in that Dade City to Newport Richey political.
Huge.
Although it used to exist even more, but the population sort of took care of that. So, so it brings us, I think, to really looking toward the future, and you all have a glorious past, no question, and really 40 years in the scheme of things isn't that long. I mean, you guys are still very vital and good looking, all that stuff. But it is a milestone, and it is a good occasion to think about what it'll look like when the next president comes in. And so, Dr. Johnson, you want to take us home?
Well, I'm certainly not out the door yet, so I tend to be here quite a little while longer. Thank you. I think perhaps you'll see a more flexible institution. Obviously, we're very proud of the fact that we received our SACS reaffirmation with no recommendations based on a quality enhancement plan that's with e-learning, distance education. I think clearly our faculty are embracing online education. We're looking at different platforms for learning management styles. We're studying the learning styles of our students. I mean, we really are focused, you know, as an instructional institution. And I've often said, and some of these folks have heard me say, instruction's the heart of this institution. Students choose to come here because they know they're going to get a great education. The faculty care about them. They're going to help them if they want. You know, obviously they need to have some initiative, but this is the heart of this institution. When we reorganized student development a couple of years after I arrived to be focused more on recruitment and engagement, that became the soul of the institution. So I think what we've got is a wonderful cadre of folks who understand how one area impacts another. Technology has that overarching umbrella of services, certainly our business operations. But I'm really enthused when I look at the potential for the new campus coming online, the fact that we're going to be looking at additional types of programs, fire science down the road, perhaps maybe professional pilot, you know, things that we feel like are cutting edge, but within the realm of workforce so that people can be educated and then find a job and not have to leave the area. So I just think the sky's the limit, always have felt that way. Unfortunately, resources kind of ground us a little bit. But I'm never going to just use that as an excuse. I think there's ways, we've seen it clearly, you do more with less, and we do it. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies because we do it, and then the legislator says, well, why do you need more money? You're doing it. So you do have to walk that thin line, but never a closed door, never an opportunity that a student who really chooses and wants an education can find a way through our foundation, through all the areas that we help. So it's a well-oiled machine. I'm just privileged to be on the team and certainly let these people run with it because they have been quite successful and the evidence is there. So.
Well,
Good job.
well, I think that's the perfect place to wrap this up. We have something very exciting to look forward to here. We're going to vacate the stage and watch it with you all. I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with these 3 wonderful people.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.